Hey everyone, we're here for our next talk. We have Matt, the CEO of Blocknative, and he'll be doing a talk on EIP-1559 and NFT drops, everything you need to know. And I'll let him take it from here. Would you mind sharing your slides?
You bet. Thanks so much. Great to be here. Good morning, everyone. My name is Matt, and I am the founder and CEO of Blocknative. Today, we're going to spend about 30 minutes talking about EIP 1559 and NFT drops based on all the data that we've been collecting since the London hard fork. So I'm going to just pop this into presentation mode, and we'll bash through this. As usual, happy to take questions in chat. We're going to go through three things today. 101 on 1559, share some real world data that's never been shared before. We're pretty excited to share that with you today. And then a few useful resources from us. So getting into 101, hey, before the London hard fork, which was in early August, Ethereum gas prices were relatively straightforward. It was a simple first price auction model. And the good news was they were exceptionally easy to understand, this first price auction, because you basically had one variable to deal with as an end user. You just had to set your gas price, and that was it. The bad news was that it was pretty difficult to estimate what the correct gas price would be. And so you had a lot of people who were basically overspending on gas and wasting money. And you had a lot of sort of negative externalities associated with how gas prices and transaction fees sort of worked on the network, which was difficult. So as you're well aware, we implemented EIP 1559 across the network, which was implemented at the London hard fork on August 5th. And the good news here, there's a lot of good news here for 1559. It's vastly easier to estimate sort of how fees should be structured. The good news was it introduced variable block sizes, which isn't as well understood, that basically blocks now can expand based on demand to accommodate more transactions that are pending. And the good news is it introduces this deflationary pressure into the network where all of the base fee is burned. And so basically the more the network is used, the more ETH gets burned. And therefore this should have an increase, a decrease of the supply, and therefore an increase in the value of ETH. Is that 1559 is significantly more complex to navigate, and we're hearing about this regularly. The biggest sort of challenge that we're going to talk about is, rather than one variable, there's now three variables that everybody has to worry about, and they're interdependent. They relate to each other in varying fashions. We're going to talk through that. And the other big piece of bad news is London hard fork, it's only been in production since August 5th, so there's actually limited real-world data about how transactions actually perform and how the fees actually change over time. And we today are going to actually start to shine some light here. So we're going to, in the second half of this session, share some data that's never been shared before about how the fees interact as around NFT launches. Okay. So these three independent variables as part of EIP 1559 are the base fee, the max priority fee, and the max fee per gas. We're going to talk about each one of these three individually. These are also known as the priority fee. Max priority fee is the formal name, but it's commonly referred to as the priority fee, also referred to as the minor tip. And the max fee per gas is commonly referred to as the max fee. So the challenge is there's some subtlety to the language, and it's actually pretty easy to mix them up. The max priority fee is quite a bit different than the max fee, but they sound sort of the same. One has priority in it, one does not. So it's an additional form of complexity, is the language here is a little bit trickier to navigate. Now, getting into each one of these three individually, the base fee is determined by the network. This is sort of the core of 1559. Rather than first price auction and the contents of the mempool and what's going on determining the fees, the core of the fee for inclusion is called the base fee, and this is intrinsic to the network. It's actually a kind of a significant change. The network is now aware of itself in ways that it wasn't before, and it's aware of how much demand there is on the network, and the network adjusts the base fee in response to demonstrated demand. Okay, the base fee is burned. So this is really important. It doesn't go to anyone. You're not incenting anybody with it. You pay your base fee. It's required for inclusion, regardless of how you get included. And that base fee just disappears. It gets burned, never to be seen again. And the base fee changes by this very simple algorithm. And the algorithm basically determines how the base fee changes. So no miner controls it, no third party controls it. It's controlled by the network, and it's in direct response to demonstrated demand. Okay. On-chain demand, super important. It's on-chain demand. And how it works is really pretty simple. Simple, but also intuitive, sort of insightful and refined. The base fee targets 50% full blocks. So with variable block sizes, you're trying to, at any given time, the base fee is trying to say, based on demand from the last block, let's make sure blocks are 50% full. If blocks are 50% full, we don't change the base fee. That basically means that supply and demand are evenly matched, and we should just continue at the current fee because that's great. Now, if you wind up with much greater demand, which is oftentimes the case during NFT launches, you'll wind up with 100% full blocks. In the event of a 100% full block, there's no more room. The base fee will increment by the maximum 12.5% for the next block. It clicks up. If the next block is 100% full, 12.5% increase again, and it will keep going up by the maximum 12.5% amount for every 100% full block. Now, as you might imagine, if the block is greater than 50% full, but less than 100%, the base fee will still increase, but by less than the maximum 12.5%. So it's this algorithm which is designed to smooth out demand for the network and designed to smooth out sudden spikes. Okay. Now, conversely, a 100% empty block, if there's no transactions that have the current base fee that are confirmed, the base fee will go down by the maximum amount, which is again negative 12.5%. Again, if you have a less than 50% full block, but not a 100% empty block, or a 0% full block is probably the better way to say this, the base fee will decrease, but by less than 12.5%. Now, as you look at this, you might realize, like, hey, there's lots of circumstances where a 100% full block will happen, so the base fee can rise relatively quickly, but it seems like it's going to be less common for a 0% full block or an empty block. So what tends to happen is the base fee can rise fairly quickly, but it takes longer for it to come back down because there's generally going to be some volume on the network which is willing to pay the current base fee. So that's one of the characteristics of 1559. The base fee tends to rise faster than it declines. There's some consequences to that. Now, moving on from the base fee, which is the base amount you have to pay, there's this optional notion of a max priority fee. Optional is in quotes here because it's actually not optional. You're generally required to have at least a one-way max priority fee. This is entirely determined by the user. You just type this in. Obviously, your wallet may set a recommended max priority fee, but this fee is like a tip because it goes directly to the miners. So at the end of the day, miners are doing work to include transactions in a block, and they need some incentive to do so. Otherwise, why would they pick your transaction versus anybody else's? So what you do is you have your base fee in your transaction, you add something on top for the tip, and that basically incents a miner to include you in the transaction. So whereas the base fee is algorithmically determined by the network, the max priority fee, max fee or miner tip, is determined by the users or bots. And there's a lot more variability, and it's a lot more subject to rapid changes for the max priority fee than the base fee. And we're going to show that in a little bit. Finally, you have this notion of max fee per gas. And max fee per gas is something that a lot of people pay attention to and fundamentally don't understand. And I really want to encourage folks to slow down and pay attention to this section of max fee per gas. A max fee per gas is sort of the upper bound, the absolute most you're willing to pay for your transaction to be included in a block. Now, you will never pay more than the max fee per gas. It's the absolute upper bound limit. But you will often, and generally most of the time, pay less than the max fee per gas. So the max fee per gas is a scary setting that you put in on your transaction, and it feels like, well, that's a big number. But almost always you're going to pay less unless, of course, you're dealing with very high network congestion. So the max fee per gas is the priority fee plus the base fee times some sort of safety factor. Now, why the safety factor? Because the base fee is required for inclusion. if you do not have an adequate base fee, the base fee associated with your transaction, actually the max fee, that is less than the actual base fee, you are not a candidate for inclusion, and your transaction will sit and maybe get dropped and maybe disappear from the network, and you will wind up with reduced transaction predictability. You don't know what's going to happen. So we always recommend, we as Blocknative recommend, whatever the current base fee is, you multiply it by a safety factor to protect your transaction against sudden increases in the base fee. So generally what we recommend, and our gas estimator, which we'll show in a minute, has a safety factor of 2, which is our max fee calculation is base fee times 2 plus priority fee. And that basically will protect your transaction. Should the base fee start to rise suddenly while it's submitted, you'll pay more, but at least you won't get dropped or have low transaction predictability. Whereas if you set your max fee to the minimum, which is the current base fee plus the priority fee, small changes in the base fee can make your transaction not marketable, which will reduce transaction predictability, reduce transaction performance, and you'll wind up with things like stuck wallets. You'll wind up with things like, you just don't know what's going on. This is where it gets confusing for the end user. Now, this notion of safety factor is, hey, most of the time you're not going to pay this. You're going to pay what the base fee plus the priority fee is. Base fee is rising, you'll pay that. You're going to have some headroom in your max fee. But under extreme network circumstances, by setting an aggressive safety factor, you'll protect yourself from becoming non-marketable or getting dropped by the network. Again, it's a weird thing because you're setting a max fee and it seems like a bigger number than it should be. The transaction gets confirmed, then you wind up paying a lot less. You're like, why did I bother doing that? It's just the safety factor which is coming into play. Though under certain circumstances, particularly when there's things like major NFT drops, which we're here to talk about today, the safety factor and setting a max fee correctly will really save your butt. And so we really recommend that people do it. Now, there's something here that's worth noting. We talk about this in a blog post that we published. There's this notion of the max priority fee. It's called max priority fee, not just priority fee. And the reason why is there are circumstances where the base fee rises and your base fee plus your priority fee is still marketable, but the base fee starts to eat into the priority fee. So there's certain circumstances where the priority fee associated with your transaction will be less than the max priority fee that you specify. And that is because the base fee is increasing and it's chewing away at some of your max priority fee. Eventually what happens is the base fee will exceed your max fee, i.e., under no circumstances are you willing to pay the current price for inclusion, and therefore your transaction will sit and is at risk of being dropped, and you're at risk of having a stuck wallet. Now, your transaction, which is below the minimum base fee, as soon as the base fee declines and comes back down to the point where your transaction now is marketable, it once again becomes a candidate for inclusion. However, the base fee declines slower than it increases, so this can take some time to happen, and it can result in unpredictable performance. So generally we recommend trying to get in or actually not doing the transaction at all and waiting until you see the base fee come down to something which is a little bit more palatable for your transaction. Now, all of this, so the big thing here is you'll always be charged your priority fee. Whatever priority fee you put in is going to go to the miners or some portion of that. There's no way to avoid that. Your priority fee is going to get spent. You're rarely charged your entire max fee, though sometimes you will be. And the risk you face is underpayment of the base fee. This was where things get weird, when things get tough to figure out. This is when you're refreshing your browser, trying to figure out why isn't my transaction going through? It's because the base fee is below the minimum. Actually, the max fee is under the minimum, and your transaction is just going to sit. So this is the scenario to avoid. And this is when it comes to gas estimation under EIP-1559. Overpayment is a bummer because you reduce profitability, but underpayment is much more problematic. So we really advise folks to be very sensitive to this notion of underpayment. And that's why you set your max fee per gas aggressively to ensure that you get into the block. Now, all of this stuff, which I just went through very quickly, we cover in a blog post that we call the Definitive Guide to Ethereum 1559 Gas Fee Calculations. I'm just going to pop out of this for a second and show this blog post. It's right here. And we created this blog post because we kept getting questions about how this stuff really works. And we started to write it down and explain it. And it turned out it was sort of a lot more complicated to explain than we thought. And so if you really have questions about how all this stuff works together and why, I really encourage you to read through this blog post carefully. And in particular, this scenario where we have a series of blocks. You have 7 blocks in a row, all of which are 100% full, all of which result in a 12.5% increase in the base fee, and then sort of what happens to your transaction under various scenarios. And so again, this will all become a lot clearer, be easier to sort of wrap your mind around, help you transact with confidence by understanding this dynamic. So that's available right here. It's pretty easy to find on any simple web search. Okay, so now with that as a background, we're exactly halfway in looking at EIP 1559 101. Let's look at some real world data. So this is another big challenge. You had years and years of data under the prior regime, under the first price auction regime. And so there was a lot of benchmarks you could look at, historical precedents, things we can understand. And now we're in a whole new world of how transaction fees are getting set. And there's just not a lot of real world data out there. Now, we at Blocknative are mempool specialists. We pay attention to what's going on in the global mempool in real time. And not only do we collect everything as it's happening, but we store it for subsequent analysis. And so what I'm going to share now is never been shared before. So this is just for us, top secret. There's some alpha ahead. And really what's going to happen here is we're going to understand NFT launches basically is where algorithms meet psychology. So you have this idea that the EIP 1559 regime makes it a lot easier to understand gas fees. That's true most of the time, except where psychology takes over, and then it gets a lot harder to understand what's going on. And specifically the crucible of NFT launches, where you have a lot of anticipation, a lot of sudden surge of transactions on the network. What starts to happen is the smoothness goes away and you get some very sharp cliffs. Okay. And so what we're going to do now is I'm going to share some data that's never been shared before. And there's 3 NFT launches we're going to go through all in a similar format. So the first is an NFT launch called Fatalis. It launched on August 31st. So this is just a little more than 3 weeks after the London hard fork. And here's what the base fee did. So this is the entire network. Here's what the base fee did during the launch, the NFT launch of Fatalis. And you can see it's doing exactly what the base fee is supposed to do. It goes up in a sort of a gradual fashion. There's a couple little stair steps in there. And then sort of basically people are saying fees are super high. It's 2,000 Gwei almost, sort of levels out. And then demand drops, the NFT launch is over. We have some, blocks which are effectively 0% full, and it comes back down actually quite steeply. Okay, so you go, okay, 1559, got it, can see what's going on here, can see how things are happening, makes sense. But now let's look at the max priority fee or the minor tip. Very different story. So you see the red line here is like 1 or 2 Gwei, what people typically think an appropriate minor tip is. But as soon as the Fatalis NFT drop launches, this is the minimum priority fee in the block. So you look at an entire block, all of the transactions that are included, what is the lowest fee? Not the highest, the lowest. Whoa, right away, people who are jumping on this NFT, they're tipping more than 1,000 Gwei. Okay, and so if we compare these two, oh, look at that, right? That at this moment, to get included, you had to have this massive tip. And at the beginning of the launch, the priority fee dominates over the base fee for inclusion. Effectively, what happens is very suddenly the network shifts from this really smooth thing to what amounts to a priority gas auction, right? That basically now people are just bidding on the priority fee for inclusion to participate in the Fatalis launch. Now, here in this graph, we overlay these two so we can see the difference. But in practice, what happens is they get added together. Your transaction fee is your base fee plus your priority fee. So it looks like this. You sum them. And now to put them in purple, this is what was actually happening on the network. Now, what's actually pretty fascinating here, and we see this pattern quite a bit, is as soon as the launch happens, psychology kicks in, okay? And it's all about priority fee, and it jumps up. The fee for inclusion is about 13,000 or 1,300 GUE, okay? And there's some quick perturbations, but over time, over the course of, I don't know, it looks like about 5 minutes, the base fee catches up. And once the base fee hits about 1,500 GUE, you can see the priority fee sort of doesn't matter anymore. The priority fee goes quite low because effectively the price is all the way at the top, right? And then we're just now, these two things trend together. We reach a peak of almost 2,500 GUE, and then the NFT drop is effectively over. My guess is it sells out and the network returns to stabilization. Now, worth noting, look at the beginning at 340 UTC, where the base fee is, but then look at 404 at the end. It seems like it's come down a lot, but the base fee plus the priority fee is effectively doubled. So you see this idea where this big spike comes up and then it comes back down, and it will take a long time, hours often, for it to all the way decrease to the prior base fee. So again, this really interesting behavior, right? NFT drop, fees go way up, sort of it's like a tabletop almost with a slight rise, rapid decline, still at the end of that decline, double what it was before, okay? Pretty interesting stuff. We think this is psychology crossing with algorithms. Okay, let's look at another one. Maybe that's an outlier. So this is now the CryptoDad launch. It's about 10 days after. It's on 9/10. Here we see a very similar pattern. Base fee cruising along, launch happens, spike comes back down, a lesser spike, lower demand on the network for CryptoDads. But whoa, look at the priority fee here. Wow, priority fee much larger, completely dominating, and interestingly happening with a gap in the middle. Not sure what that gap really represents, but if you were trying to participate in the CryptoDads NFT launch, there's a sudden surge up to 1,000 GUE that persists for a period of time, a handful of blocks, and then a sudden drop down to about 750, and then a drop basically to very little, and then demand spikes back up almost above 1,500 GUE, and again sort of stair stepping back down. As we did before, these things sum, much less of a stair step function here, much more sudden surge, sudden spike. If your transaction happens to be pending during one of these spikes, you'll get some weird performance. So this is why it's important to be monitoring what's going on with gas fees and potentially looking for these little windows of opportunity where you can get a transaction confirmed for less than, competing for a major NFT launch, okay? Again, spikes way up, doesn't last very, very long. This one lasts just minutes. Look at the time scale here, comes back down. And then again, if we look at the base fee at the beginning of the chart versus at the end, the base fee is effectively doubled post NFT launch because it takes a long time for demand to stabilize and for the base fee to decline back to its prior starting point. Okay. And this is the third of these three examples. Again, this data has never been shared before. Galaxy Eggs, this was 9/14. So this is 4 days afterwards. And here we see low base fee, really, really, sort of just perfectly predictable climb up, some spikes, some tabletop behavior, and then a very rapid decline down. And you can see post this launch, the base fee is about 4x what it was at the beginning, so pretty high. Now let's look at the priority fee. Again, very sudden spikes, really large spikes. The scales here is over 2,000 GUE for some of these spikes. If we look at what happens here, see how it's all front loaded. The beginning of the NFT launch, it's all about the priority fee. We sum these together and we wind up again with this tabletop effect. I'm curious to know what happened here. There may have been a little bit of a pre-release, a pre-announcement. I'm not sure what happened. Base fee comes down. And then look at this very clear tabletop effect, right? Minimum priority fee is above 2,000 GUE. This is minimum, right? There are some blocks where maybe a couple of transactions get in below this large minimum priority fee, but probably most of the transactions in these blocks are pretty high. It's taken over, and then NFT launches over, declines pretty quickly, but again, now 4x. Now, again, as we look at this, there's this equilibrium that occurs between the minimum priority fee and the base fee right here, in this case, at about 2,000 Gwei. At that point, people say, okay, I'm done, right? People are still consuming transactions in the block. Fees are still going up, but the priority fee effectively has ceased to be a factor, and then it just comes right back down. So again, there's this comment that you'll see on the network around, you don't need a priority fee of 1 or 2 Gwei and you're fine. That's true most of the time, except when you really need to get a transaction on chain in the middle of a surge of demand, in which case the priority fee needs to go way, way up. So that's 3 examples that we think are pretty illustrative of real world behavior and how the psychology of the priority fee, i.e. the miner tip, interacts and interplays with the base fee. This is why we call these variables interdependent, because they respond to each other. Massive change in the priority fees will probably be indicator of a rapid rise in the base fee. The base fee will get to a point where the priority fee no longer matters as much. But for those of you out there who are interested in participating in NFT drops or any other major on-chain event, is a very characteristic behavior, and these changes can happen very suddenly. So you look at these sort of vertical jumps up in, one moment your transaction seems appropriately priced and a good candidate for inclusion, and the next moment it's not. And this is why this is still a tricky problem, why it's still really challenging on Ethereum L1 to predictably set transaction prices and know what you're going to get. There are a whole bunch of things where you say, look, there's certain times of day where NFT launches are less likely to happen. There are times where you could say, look, the base fee seems a little high. You could say, oh, you know what? It's basically still coming. It's been affected by an NFT launch and maybe it'll come down a little bit. But these are things to pay attention to. And this is stuff that we study all day long. And this is why we do what we do at Blocknative. Now, to help you here, there's a bunch of resources that we have. First off is we provide what's widely regarded as one of the most accurate gas estimators. It's fully EIP-1559 compliant. You can get to it at gas.blocknative.com. And here you'll have all the critical variables you need, including the current base fee, including the current priority fee by probability of inclusion. We don't do fast, medium, slow. We do probability of inclusion in next block, 99, 95, 90, 80th, and 70th percentile. And then we provide a max fee calculation, which is 2 times the base fee plus the priority fee. This can be disorienting for folks. So if you want to do a comparison to anything else you're used to, there's this little switch here, so 1559. If you turn that off, you'll actually see legacy transactions. So it's much more comparable to anything else going on out there. We benchmark what we do to what everybody else is doing. And we can tell you we're a lot more accurate, particularly during these periods of sudden base fee increase and these decreases as well. But we have a ML-based model behind all of this that gets retrained every 2 hours. So it is as up to the moment as we know how to make it. And it tracks actual fees very, very closely. We recently introduced a browser extension for both Chrome and Brave. So you can get this right in your browser if that's how you prefer to consume it. And this is all powered by a very powerful underlying API that you can get access to programmatically with updates for our commercial customers every second. And so if you really want it to incorporate this data to a trading system or to your own protocol, you can use our Gas Platform API, and it does so very, very cleanly. And that's everything I had today for EIP-1559 and NFT drops. Hopefully that's a good crash course on what you need to know with some good resources for you to use after the fact. I'm going to stop sharing, see if there's any questions. There we go. Okay, so let's see. So you're saying the downside of that chart, the base fee is what it is, but the priority fee is included in it. So typically, under typical network conditions, the base fee will dominate. The priority fee will be 1 or 2 Gwei, and basically that's really what you need to pay attention to. However, under periods of rapid increases in network consumption, network demand, the priority fee will take over and the behavior on the network flips from being algorithmically determined by the base fee to being psychologically determined by people who are trying to get on chain. And so, generally the rule of thumb is Priority fee doesn't matter until it does, in which case it matters a lot, which is why you set your max fee conservatively to make sure you can account for that. But there are certainly times where the network just gets to the point where you go, you know what, the right thing to do is wait unless there's something super urgent happening. The big problem is going to be things like massive changes in the price of ETH causing liquidations. People are all competing to get transactions on chain to either service their debt positions or to prioritize liquidation transactions. So I think we're going to see that coming up at some point, and that's something to pay attention to. So anyways, I'm just out of time. I want to be respectful of our other speakers. My name is Matt Cutler. You can find me on Twitter at @mcutler. If you want these slides, I'm more than happy to share them, and happy transacting out there. Thanks, everybody. Thanks for joining me.
Matt, this is great. Would you mind dropping the slides in the chat or on Twitter?
I will drop them on Twitter. Okay.
Okay, perfect. Awesome. We're going to transition to the next talk. Thanks again.
Thank you.